Dennis Blanton, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Stan. It's great to be here.
We are delighted to have you here. You are a professor of anthropology at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And for the purposes of what we're doing today, you are the author of this book. I want to hold this up so our audience can see it. Conquistador's Wake, tracking the legacy of Hernando De Soto in the Indigenous Southeast. This book was published in 2020 by our friends at the University of Georgia Press. We are delighted to have you here today.
Well, it's my pleasure entirely. This is a topic that I cannot get enough of. So.
Well, and we appreciate that. You are Georgia born and bred. I believe you got your undergraduate degree at the University of Georgia. So you know this neck of the woods literally very well down here in Southeast Georgia, but also I know Southwest. So what we're doing today is the part of a series that we're doing here at GHS called Georgia Uncovered, investigating our state's legends. And as you well know, one of the legends of Georgia is that Hernando De Soto came through here in the mid 16th century. And there are places all over Georgia that have his name attached to them or the legend of De Soto attached to them. And we're going to break that down a little bit today. I'm going to talk to you about how much of that is myth, how much of it is supported by scientific evidence, how much of it is supported by archaeological evidence. You have been at the forefront of trying to establish these things. But the first thing I want to ask you is a very kind of broad 10,000 foot level question, which is why is it so important now as we reach almost 500 years since De Soto visited our state, what became Georgia, for people to still cling to this legend in places we know pretty sure he never was. And yet there are many communities, as you address in your book, for whom it's very important to say, oh, yes, De Soto was here. Why do we still care about this?
Well, we can say definitively that many of the places that people believe De Soto trekked through have a valid claim. Others, we can say definitively, do not have a valid claim. And then others we can say, we don't know yet, maybe, maybe not. In terms of the larger meaning of De Soto and why we should attach any value to it is that his story is one of an era in which the world order shifted quickly and dramatically. And in fact, the legacy of the changes that unfolded in his day are one that we still live with. We talk a lot, for instance, today about this phenomenon of globalization and how we are affected by it and struggle with it. Well, that really began, that entire phenomenon began in De Soto's day. It was the time when European powers began to take an intercontinental perspective on the world, and they began to assert themselves in places they never had before. And it really did bring many, many deep, lasting changes to places that we still struggle with. But there are other reasons as well. I'll say that the DeSoto story is just plain old interesting. It's a fascinating story. It's an adventure story. It's a passion play. And so forth. But to ask yourself, why do places fiercely hold on, right, to De Soto as part of their own identity? It's just a human quality. And it's all about identity. Everyone and every place, I think, seeks some sort of meaning. And sometimes even characters with nefarious reputations like De Soto can give meaning to a locale. And you take these tiny little crossroads communities where often we'll see the name of De Soto attached to it. Well, that's something to hang your hat on. It's something to hang your hat on. In some cases, people value that. The one thing I've learned is that, and in fact, I won't say given up, but it's exceedingly hard to change public opinion. And I've decided that my job is not to change public opinion. If you want to be proud of a DeSoto heritage, valid or not, then that's entirely, in your rights. And I get it, I get it
Hmm.
entirely. Um, my job instead is simply to provide the facts as I see them, with the
Hmm.
hope that people will pause long enough to try and digest those facts and bring new meaning, a more accurate perspective to the way they look at their homes and the region around them. And sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. But
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
used to take it a little bit personally, but now not so much.
Well, in fact, in your book, you say, and I want to quote you here because you say it so eloquently: origin myths and heroic legends, in and of themselves, are not problematic. They are universal and even necessary. But once they infuse the local psyche and become definitional, they tend not to be at all fluid. Alternative facts are not greeted kindly. Indeed, educators and scholars constantly combat the primacy of received wisdom. New contributions might be technically credible, but they still may be greeted by fierce resistance. It is no wonder then that so many Soto legends seem never to die. History made is sometimes history made immovable. And there it is. And so, in the 5 years since you've written that, it sounds like you've decided that you're just going to put this out there and let everything fall where it may.
I think that's really the only thing we can do. And our training in my world is to do just that. I think academics today, no question about it, are taken to task for agendas. Sometimes they're perceived, sometimes they're real, and it is problematic when we start to insert, personal agendas or political agendas into what we do. And I find much more comfort in collecting information and presenting it in a dispassionate, sort of neutral way so that it can be consumed and then interpreted independently by other people. And they may or may not agree with me, and that's okay. But
Hmm.
it's our job to build, we'll say, a corpus of data, corpus of information that people can work with.
Hmm. Um, so set the stage for our audience, if you will, those who are not archaeologists or historians. Hernando De Soto came through the American Southeast between what years before his death and where he was supposedly buried in the Mississippi River? What years are we talking about?
We're talking about the period between 1539 and 1543. DeSoto landed in or about Tampa Bay in July 1539, and he died in May 1542. Now, the survivors of his expedition wandered around a bit longer,
Hmm.
hoping to make it by foot, actually, to Mexico, which was the nearest place they thought they could find, fellow Europeans,
Hmm.
which was
Hmm.
true. Um, but then they resorted to boat building and a float down the Mississippi and then a sail out across the Gulf of Mexico. But um, DeSoto himself, I say this all the time. I wish somebody with the capital and the talent would write a screenplay that would tell the stories, like this epic film of
Hmm.
DeSoto, because he was his life. I mean, undoubtedly, his life was defined by the events of this era. And most people don't realize it, but long before he set foot in North America, he became very familiar with and a force himself in elsewhere in the Americas, which was Central and South America. He arrived in what's today Panama as a teenager. He cut his conquistador's teeth in Central America. He attracted the interest, through his exploits of the famous Pizarro brothers.
Hmm.
They enlisted him as a captain in their small army, which eventually culminated in the conquest of the great Inca Empire in Peru. And he left there this fabulously wealthy man. Uh, and I'm always baffled by the decision he made to return, because he never, by rights, had any need to do anything else. He had gained entree into the highest Spanish society. He was wealthy beyond imagination, and so he could have led this life of leisure, but he chose to return to what the Spanish called La Florida, which was this enormous, in fact, undefined territory that we know as the Southeast United States, hoping, I think, to duplicate his success in Peru, but also, I think, just to scratch an itch. I think he was one of these people, as we might call them today, of type A personalities. He was driven man. And that, I think, accounts for a lot of his decision to come back here. And of course, as you imply, the outcome of this second expedition was anything but positive, and he paid the ultimate price.
Yeah. And so he lands in what you say now around modern day Tampa Bay, and begins moving north. How many men did he have with him in his entourage? How many people are we talking about?
His expedition in the very beginning, meaning the numbers of people that he shipped literally across the Atlantic, and then others he assembled in Cuba, which was his first landing point,
Hmm.
would have numbered somewhere like 650 to 700 people. At that point, it actually included a few women,
Hmm.
and then throughout there were some people of color, some of which were enslaved, some were not. There were people from across Iberia, many Portuguese, for example, some folks from North Africa who were some of these participants of color. And so it was a really interesting, in fact, very diverse group of people. By the time he hit Tampa Bay area, we figure it was at least 600. And so that's sort of the working estimate that I use when I
Hmm.
answer that question.
So they begin moving north, and and of course there's no state line at that point. They didn't say, well, now we're going to go to Georgia. I understand that. But to ask a question that an uninitiated layperson might ask, an expedition that big, and we're not talking 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. We're talking certainly the Spanish and the Catholic Church, very well literate by that time. One can presume they're fairly good map makers, if these people had already conquered large portions of the Western Hemisphere. So the first question I have is, and this is a silly question to ask an archaeologist, but it's the first question: how can we really not know where they went? 600 people trekking across even a wilderness, and this was a populated wilderness. This was not an uninhabited territory. This, as you point out, the story of discovering where Hernando De Soto went is also really about discovering the people, the indigenous population that he contacted, and his impact on them. How do we not know where he went?
Yeah, well,
That's a silly question, I know, but the first question is, how do we really not know where somebody, did they not write it down? Did they not make maps? Did they not keep journals? How do we not know?
that's a great question. A lot of people ask it, and it sort of cuts to the chase. Why in the world is archaeology even of any value at this point, particularly when it's concerned with somebody like DeSoto? And this is the thing, is that so many people believe that so much of American history, including these very, very early events, are in the bag, right?
Right.
We've got it
Exactly.
nailed down.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like,
It's a hypothetical question I'm asking, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
But
so it's like, of course we know where DeSoto was. Well,
mm,
my reply is, of course we don't. And the reason is, first of all, there is no map. Um, that's been, let's just say, a frustration of all Soto scholars.
mhm.
There might have been a map. If there was, it doesn't come down to us. But there were journals, no question about it. And I keep those journals literally on my bed table. Uh, it is my go-to source. It is the jumping off point for all of it. The beginning is not the archaeology. The beginning are these journals, and there are 4 of these things that we call the Soto Chronicles. 3 of them were written by participants. And these were people, boots on the ground folks who observed what was going on. They lived it, they knew it, and they could tell it better than anybody else. There was one other that's really kind of a neat one, but a lot of people are more dismissive of it, and I would call it a piece of investigative journalism. And it was written by a fellow who was not a participant. He was a descendant of people who were involved in the so-called conquest of the Americas. And he went around Iberia and he interviewed people who were participating. And he wrote essentially all the stories and tales down in one between, 2 covers, as it were. And I think it's a really interesting source. All of these things we have to take with the proverbial grain of salt, because the accounts were put down with their own agendas. Some people were trying to, first of all, rationalize their actions, some of which were quite brutal. In other cases, they were trying to paint a picture of this new land that would be compelling and attractive to people who might follow, and also to potential investors down the road. But suffice it to say, these 4 written works are in close agreement. That's kind of the litmus test, is whether they follow the same sort of storyline, and they do. Some are more complete than others, but they're there and they matter a lot. Nonetheless, they're incomplete. And you have to see it as they're like, especially the first person accounts, they're tantamount to a diary. And if, as a historian, if you've ever worked with primary documents, including diaries and personal journals, they run the gamut from those that are 1 or 2 or 3 words a day to those that go on, maybe a page or 2 a day. And so that would be the way these things work. And so they leave a lot to be desired, and it's left to us to try to fill in the gaps. And there's an awful lot of inference we have to make from those documents, sort of like reading between the lines. And we can do that with some precision, I think, and accuracy. But ultimately, for me, it really is archaeology that will be the final arbiter, I think. What we get from these written accounts is akin to a handful of hypotheses about what happened and where it happened and why it happened. But they're only that. And like any good hypothesis, it's formulated to be tested. And that's my job. My job is testing hypotheses that we derive from these written accounts so that we get the story right. In my opinion, the story is so important. And certainly the era that it transpired in is so important itself that it behooves us to get it right, and that's our job. But it takes a combination of those 2 independent lines of evidence, right? That's the value. The accounts are one source done at one time by different people. My work generates additional information, so it's independent. And where they align, if they, when they come together and all of a sudden start to make some sense, then we get something we can hang our hats on. And so that really, frankly, defines a day in my life,
Hmm.
is trying to discover those alignments. And when that happens, I cannot tell, it's so thrilling. It is a thrill. And you just want to run to the mountaintop and declare to the world that, you know what, we've got a new piece of this story, and you need to hear about it. And so anyway, it's it's the way the process works. I hope that
Hmm.
makes sense.
It absolutely does. And to be clear to our listeners, these journals don't say, so we came out of Tallahassee on I-10 and we got off at exit 52 and drove 20 miles north, because you could follow that route pretty easy. Obviously, I think what they do say is we traveled in this direction, maybe, and we met this group of people. And what the archaeologists are trying to do, because we don't even have definitive evidence of where that group of people, meaning indigenous people, we don't know where this group or this town or this trading site often were. You're even trying to reconstruct those places and find where they were, and then maybe work backwards to figure out, did DeSoto go there or did he not? One of the things I want to show our audience, the people who are watching this, is in your book you've got the two trails that are known as the Swanton Trail and the Hudson Trail, named after John Swanton and Charles Hudson, both of them archaeologists, and they're tracing DeSoto's uh, travels. And there's also, of course, the glass site where you worked, which the listener and the viewer will note that your glass site is not real close to either one of those. That's what the heart of this book is about. Tell us about the glass site and why you went there in the first place. You went there to find one thing and you found something else, which was just as exciting in some ways.
Yeah, well, that's a story of my life sometimes, I think, as we set out, to test a hypothesis, and it leads in a new direction. And that was the case here. And that particular hypothesis was about testing an idea of the location of a Spanish mission. I think one of the important things for your listeners to appreciate is that Georgia's historical story begins long before James Oglethorpe. And sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow, but the fact is the Spaniards were here, nearly 200 years before the English established their toehold. And there are different, we'll say, eras within that long span of Spanish presence. One of the later ones was a time they had established Spanish missions, these Catholic religious missions throughout the region. There were many of those. And it was my interest to find one that I'd heard about since the time I was in high school down in South Georgia. We had good reason to think that, and still have good reason to think that it's somewhere on the lower part of the Ocmulgee River. And in the process of searching for it, we began to work on these Native American village sites. If you're going to find a Spaniard, most of the time you have to look where the natives were, because they were trying to, in the case of DeSoto, connect the Indian dots. In the case of the missionaries, find a flock. And so their towns are the big important starting points. So we had those towns and we started our excavation, and we found Spanish artifacts, all right. We found them pretty quickly, but it turns out they were far too old for the mission. And on the one hand, I was excited. On the other hand, I wandered off into the woods and scratched my head a while because I didn't know what to make of it. Because I recognized in these artifacts that, they made more sense for DeSoto period activity than they did for mission period activity. Well, the long and the short of it is we plunged in recognizing that we might not be working on a mission site, but something else that could even be more important. And I believe that what we found is evidence of DeSoto's passage through Georgia in the spring of 1540 at a place where no one expected it. myself included, and these discoveries were announced much to the chagrin of my colleagues. They were announced also to the elation of people in that neck of the woods of Georgia because they had never been able to stake a DeSoto claim.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the one hand, it was applauded, and the other hand, it was kind of reviled discovery. And I've had to endure, right? Both of those, one form of reception.
Did you have
But
people say, "Oh, so Dennis Blanton thinks he knows more than Charles Hudson"?
oh yes, oh and the irony was Charles Hudson was someone that I admired and still admire, and always will. And as a point of fact, I was a student of his as an
Mm-hmm.
undergraduate at the University
Mm-hmm.
of Georgia.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
I sat in the classroom. In fact, at the very time he was researching and beginning to write everything that he had written about, DeSoto and his path. So I was fully, let's just say, indoctrinated by Charles Hudson himself into what should have been, the more valid route. And I had no reason to doubt it. And for the most part today, I still have no reason to doubt most of it. But all of a sudden, I could not shake the possibility
Mm-hmm.
that here we had a new wrinkle in the route. And in fact, Dr. Hudson was always quick to say, and if you read what he wrote as well, that archaeology will be just that, the ultimate arbiter, because it's what's producing the surviving tangible evidence. And as I say, I do have confidence in what we're seeing there. In fact, I have more confidence in it today than I did then, because we've continued to research DeSoto's route in South Georgia, and we've got new evidence from another part of the state that squares very, very well with what we saw at the glass site. But I think one of the big takeaways from the glass site for your listeners is that the story is not fully told. This is a work in progress, no question. And it's also no question that it always will be a work in progress. And, for us in the business of history telling, it's a kind of job security, I suppose, but it's just a plain old fact. And as I say, in my opinion, the stakes are high because it does get back to one of your opening points about identities and meanings of geography, not only in Georgia, but in the country. And so that's the quest. And it's every day it's happening. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not alone. There are other people around the region pursuing the same questions.
There's a lot of different ways we could take this, in directions. I mean, and to be clear, so what you're finding, artifacts in the ground, that date from a certain period of, contact between Europeans and indigenous people here in Georgia. And one would, again, going back to my question, with 600 people traversing across the landscape, um, they must have left an incredible amount of stuff behind. Not only things that they traded, but just stuff they cast off. When they just, again, the way Sherman's army moved through here, and it's a lot of people doing a lot of damage, trampling over things, shedding things, dropping things. You would think that the ground would be littered with this stuff. And obviously, over the course of many years, it's going to be down below the earth. But you make the point of saying that between what is now Tallahassee and the contact that DeSoto made going into the Appalachian regions, there had been very little concrete material evidence found in Georgia, which is one of the reasons his route has always been up to question. And so that's a long way of asking the question, where is all this stuff that they clearly dropped? And when you find things like that, one of the questions that you answered, you play devil's advocate is, okay, so you find something at the glass site. Is it possible that other natives brought it there and traded it from hundreds of miles away and that DeSoto never actually got close to that site? Big question, but there's just some of the things that people I'm sure ask you that you have to deal with.
Oh, of course, and it's a common challenge. But the first thing to say is that it's natural to assume that there's this massive debris field
Here you go. That's it. That's what I was
that
looking for. Yeah.
that was left, in the wake of these
Mm-hmm.
expeditions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would have been inclined to believe the same thing, but we now know that's really not the kind of evidence that was left. But evidence was left, but it's meager. And the kind of things we have to think about. All right, so what would an expedition like this? You've got 600 people, and on top of that, you've got 200 to 300 horses,
Mm-hmm.
which have their own kind of gear. And there's going to be wear and tear and breakage. Also, in the baggage of this expedition, they were bringing things that are explicitly carried for exchange with the natives, with the native people. And I'll go back to this point I made earlier about DeSoto's experience in Central America and South America. One of the things they learned there is that they could barter some of the simplest tools, the most the most easily made glass beads for a fortune. And so DeSoto was bringing items of that kind, we'll say, made specifically for the Indian trade with him. So those are the kinds of things that would have been weaponry, there would have been personal clothing, there would be items for trade, there would be horse tack. Those were the big durable items that would survive. But I'll tell you what, they are exceedingly hard to find, even if you know you're on one of the places. And I can tell you that now for a century, archaeologists have been searching for DeSoto, in some cases been fortunate enough to find places DeSoto stopped and camped and traveled. You could take every artifact collected in all of those places and put it in a single modest-sized shipping box. I mean, it's not a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So we're not talking helmets, saddles, nothing like
No,
that. Yeah.
no. And
I mean,
this is
I would pause you here just to remind our listeners, if you've been to DeSoto Falls in North Georgia, it is called that so supposedly because in the mid 19th century near the falls, someone supposedly discovered, I'm using air quotes here, a old Spanish helmet. And what you're saying is nothing like that has ever really turned up in places we know DeSoto has been.
no.
Yeah.
Now,
Going back to the cherished myths of our state. Mm-hmm.
that's right. There has not
Yeah.
been anything, I'll just say there's not been a sexy artifact like that found. The
Yeah.
things we find are much more mundane.
Mm-hmm.
And to the average person, the objects we find that we can link with DeSoto are things they wouldn't give a second look and might even toss aside as just junk.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned differently, but they are in the ground. Now, you've asked an important question. What we're finding is this sparse trail, it's kind of a dribble of material that was left behind. It takes intense searching to find it, even when you know you're on the right spot, because there's so little of it. In my view, and this is a bit of an aside, because they're so rare, because they're so scarce, these have become some of the most precious artifacts in the country. And in fact, they've become some of the most precious artifacts in the world. And, people tend to think, in archaeological terms that it's, mummies and
Hmm.
I don't know, golden idols from somewhere that
Viking
are
ships.
precious
Yeah.
Viking ships. But no, I mean, if they're measured just in, if the measure is rarity, these things are as precious as they get. So what we're finding on these sites, including the glass site, is literally glass, these beads I mentioned, usually made in Venice,
Hmm.
for the purpose of export. We find occasional broken weapons, occasional broken ones, not intact ones. More often than not, we find these simple tools that, again, were made to trade with the Indians. These tools, I wish I had one to show up in front of you, but and there are pictures of some of these in the glassite book, but
Hmm. Hmm.
they look like a broken lawnmower blade or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. You absolutely. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
but they have an edge, and I often say, in the eyes of a Native American, 500 years ago, that simple piece of iron with a sharp edge might as well have been, an iPhone. It was a technological marvel.
Hmm.
And so that's why they carried such value to DeSoto and his men. They recognized that in exchange for one of these things, we could get information, we could get food, and if it existed in any of these villages, we could get precious metals and things of that sort. And so that's what we're finding. We're finding the
Hmm.
things that were dispersed to the Indians for those purposes, generally speaking, and occasional broken things. And that's it. And I say that's it, but because it's kind of a letdown sometimes for people to come and see what we've got, what we've
Yeah.
accumulated,
Sure.
but it's everything in this line of work. They,
Hmm.
they really
Yeah,
are.
and you're not finding a breastplate that says, "If lost, please return to Hernando de Soto." I mean, nothing definitive, right, with their name on it. I mean, this is
No,
what makes this so difficult because the
yeah,
things you're finding are small, buried in the ground. Usually, one of the fascinating parts of your book that I didn't realize is so much of the South Georgia forest has been clear cut through the years. And one of the things while you don't celebrate that, one of the benefits is it has brought stuff, I think, to the surface that would have been long, deeply buried. Am I correct in that? I know I'm getting that wrong, but there's something to that, I think, isn't there?
there's absolutely something to that. We
Yeah.
have this, we sort of look sidelong as archaeologists well, I'll just say generically, sort of development, which
Yeah.
would be, uh, um, earth moving, landscaping, construction, and so forth. But agricultural activity, timber related activity
Hmm.
can be a boon to us. And one of the lessons I've learned is to respect local knowledge. There aren't many archaeologists, and there's a good reason for that in there, but there are a whole lot of farmers, there are a whole lot of loggers, there's a whole lot of timber cruisers out there, especially in a state like Georgia, and they are out there. And they are observant people, they're curious people, they're smart people, and they're the ones who often lead people like me to these breakthroughs.
Mm.
And in my first stop, if I go to a corner of Georgia with a question about DeSoto on the mind, I crave to sit down and meet with the local folks. Now, that's not a shared perspective among all archaeologists. But the fact, listen, when I was in South Georgia, that's what I did. That's what made me tick, was to go out there and wander around and searched for things that I thought were interesting that told the story. Now, I didn't use it such, highfalutin terms, but it was my version of anthropological research. I wanted to know about the people of South Georgia. And these informants, the critical informants to me were these people that, I've described. And I still cling to that belief. And I'll tell you, this project I alluded to a bit ago down in Southwest Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
post glass site, has been punctuated by the discoveries of local people. I'm not overstating what I have learned, which I consider to be sensational at this point, would have been an absolute impossibility without willing informants who are, people, farmers, timber cruisers in particular. They've said, oh, so you're down here and you're curious about this kind of artifact. Yes, I am. Well, come on over to the house and let me show you what I've got.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's a series of, eureka moments. And you think, how could it get better than this? And all of a sudden there's another generous soul who's equally curious, who wants to share a bit of information. And
Mm-hmm.
you start to chase these leads down. And the next thing you know, you see a pattern. And then the next thing you know, it all coalesces into a no doubt about it DeSoto campsite.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've got down
Wow.
there.
And it
That's what
sounds like
we
some of this was born out of the fact that these local folks probably grew up hearing legends and stories, and because of their work, they've come into literally into contact with the soil and have picked things up off the ground.
There's no question about it. And these are people who are inspired themselves by those legends that you mentioned. History can be inspiring. Whether it's always parsed correctly or not, history can be inspiring. And one of the most important things we do as historians and archaeologists is tell a good story. That's our stock and trade. We tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
And if the stories are done well, and I mean with truth, with a factual basis, they can be as exciting as any other story. And they can be as inspiring as any other story. And these people, I think, for them, they embrace that and they're motivated by it. Even to talk to an egg-headed archaeologist, from a university somewhere.
But who sounds like he was from South Georgia originally, right?
Well, that's right. But
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, this is a bit of an aside, but it's so important. One of the most common questions I get is, how do you know where to look?
Yes. Right.
What in the world has brought you to this corner of our county that nobody visits?
Mm-hmm. And that's not on the original route of those two archaeologists that I mentioned.
Well, it's some intense research, it's intense curiosity, and it's generously shared information from people in your backyards.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you this. If you don't mind, I feel like I'm about to burst to share the story because
No, please go ahead.
When I was working at Fernbank Museum of Natural History in Atlanta, and they have been the number one ongoing sponsor of what I do in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm eternally grateful. And so we still work closely together. But when I was at Fernbank and I started this glassite project, the director of the museum is really interesting. She got a call from a landowner, a major landowner down near Albany, Georgia. And he said, look, I've got this property and the folks on my plantation are finding lots of artifacts, and I've got reason to be maybe a little bit concerned because they could be important, and they might even be literally valuable. So have you got anybody that can come down here and give me a sense of what's going on? And she says, absolutely, I've got just a fellow. And so I was dispatched, right, to South Georgia, to this corner of South Georgia on the Chickasawhatchee Creek. Well, I beat a pat down there in a hurry because I knew that if there's one part of Georgia that most folks would agree DeSoto traipsed through, it was down there. And so I had DeSoto on the brain by that point, and I thought, God, this could be another opportunity to find a guy. And so I went down there with that sort of ulterior motive. Well, what this landowner did was tell this young fellow who worked on the farm, I want you to lay out every artifact you've got in your home, and we're going to bring this archaeologist down. He's going to tell us what they mean. I walked into that house, every flat surface in the house, the floor, the countertops, the coffee table was covered in artifacts. There were thousands and thousands of artifacts. I almost short-circuited. I mean, it was unbelievable. There was like 15,000 years of Georgia history laid out right there in that one small house.
And this was genuine stuff.
Oh yeah, this is legit stuff. Well, a bit to my chagrin, there was no obvious DeSoto stuff. And I asked him, I said, well, you've got some wonderful things here, but do you have any Indian pottery? Because Indian pottery of a certain style can tell me its age and whether or not it aligns with the DeSoto era. He says, oh, I've got buckets of this stuff. So he went out to his barn and he came back with a 5-gallon bucket full of pottery, dumped it out, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is exactly the kind of pottery that was being made when DeSoto came through here. And I said, can you take me to this place? And he looked at the owner of the property, and the owner of the property said, shrugged his shoulder and says, why not? And so we took off in this caravan of pickup trucks, and we got over there, and the ground was littered with these artifacts. And so that was the beginning. And a bit later, just to try and compress some of this, I was on another plantation down there, and the caretaker of the plantation had recently retired from cruising timber, and I had begun to find the most remarkable thing in the world, and there were these intact Indian houses in the woods of Southwest Georgia, in the Chickasawhatchee Swamp. And I say intact, what I mean is there were intact vestiges of these houses at surface level. It was startling. And I had gone over to his plantation to document some of these things with a technology we call LIDAR, which is a laser-based mapping technology. He saw that I was just so excited. He says, well, I got to tell you, I think I know where there's more of these things. And as it turned out, they were actually on the same property that I had just been. And nobody knew about it.
Wow.
And so I went back. I said, well, can you tell me about where? He says, I'm not sure exactly, but I'll give you a rough spot. And I went over there and thrashed around in the swamp for a couple of days, and lo and behold, found them. And now we've seen so many of these things. When you go there, it's like wandering into a Native American ghost town. And these are the places that we're finding DeSoto artifacts. So there's now all of a sudden this new equation in my world.
Wow.
Where you see these well-preserved traces of Indian houses, you'll find DeSoto artifacts. The amazing thing about it is this, and this is what I mean by these accounts from DeSoto's participants as hypotheses. When they left what's now Tallahassee, they spent several months there in a winter encampment, just stalled. They finally resumed their march in the beginning of March of 1540, headed north, okay, through what's today Georgia. The first Indian territory that they came to, north of Tallahassee, was one that DeSoto and his chroniclers named Coppachecki. They got the name from the Indians. And that was where this plantation happened to fall. So this plantation down there in the Chickasaw-Hatchie, we know now, encompasses this Indian territory. It's remarkable. But when DeSoto got to this place, Coppachecki, one of the things that they remarked about in their descriptions was that, you know what? The Indian architecture has all of a sudden changed. When were in Florida, what we know as Florida today, they said all the Indian houses were very lightly built, open air kinds of affairs. Very airy, breezy, shady dwellings, which you would understand. But when we get to Coppachecki, what we see are dwellings that look like caves under the ground. Caves under the ground. And that's what we're seeing. These traces of buildings that we're finding are the collapsed earth-covered structures that the Spanish were describing as these caves under the ground.
Mm.
And so it's the intersection of information from those Spanish accounts with information from a timber cruiser, with the findings of our follow-up archaeology that all coalesce to say this is where DeSoto slept. And there are not many places we can say that with that degree of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, frankly, it's 20 years. We're finally getting it. We're finally, I think, hitting our stride in our ability to tell the DeSoto story in very accurate terms, at least in the state of Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I will say that our neighbors in the Carolinas are not there yet. And I also say, I hesitate to say this, but our colleagues in the next state west, Alabama, and then a little bit farther west in Mississippi, are using the methodology and the logic that we've developed in Georgia with the same results. So all of a sudden, in the last 5 years, there's been this new burst of Soto-related discoveries that I think, frankly, has been inspired by what we've been doing in Georgia. And, for me personally, of course, there's a certain point of pride, but what I really want to hope is that people in the state of Georgia appreciate that it's their land, it's their territory that's been this proving ground for in our search for DeSoto. It's where we've worked out, the more effective ways to go about it. And I think it's going to be this place where we first begin to cast away some of the old ideas about the nature of DeSoto's trek and what it meant. So I would say we're in a bit of a revolutionary period in DeSoto scholarship in the states that in a probably poorly chosen word, hosted um, this expedition.
Um, is the site in Southwest Georgia, does it depart from the Swanton or Hudson route, or does it confirm, or is there going to be a Blanton route?
It is exactly where, more for all intents and purposes, exactly where Swanton and Hudson believe it to be down there. Now
Hmm.
we've challenged some of their conventional wisdom,
Hmm.
but it's like the fine print. The things that we've altered about the story there would be footnotes to the the route as they describe it. Now, I do believe that the glassite will stand in the way that I've suggested.
Hmm.
And so I would probably call it maybe a Blanton dog leg as opposed to a Blanton route. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my goal, right, is it's not about challenging um, a priori, right? What these folks, my predecessors have done, but it's about refining it somehow
Sure. Hmm.
and helping us build confidence.
Well, and it sounds like you're finding hard archaeological scientific evidence for what they could, in some ways, only conjecture in terms of the route. You're putting paid to what they actually in some cases. In some cases, it sounds like you're blazing your own trail, but you're actually finding this stuff. I mean, if what you just said is, if I hear it correctly, it's as important as the discovery that the fellow made down in Tallahassee, where for years we thought the only place we knew for sure along the entire route where DeSoto was in the front yard of what became the old governor's mansion in Tallahassee. That was the only place, so we were told, where we knew for certain among the myths and legends. And now what you're saying is you're going to definitively prove that he was in Southwest Georgia at these sites.
That's correct. There's no
Wow.
question.
Are you going to publish this in the
I'm
same?
writing it now. I
All
am
right.
writing it now. In fact,
Okay.
before part of my morning before we spoke was pounding away,
Okay.
telling the story. So
Well, this is revolutionary. Yeah.
there'll be another book, and
Okay.
you referenced again the discoveries at Tallahassee, which are important and exciting. They're not to be dismissed, certainly. But I will say, I do question whether those artifacts were left by DeSoto.
Mm.
And I say that because uh, the things we're finding in the immediate aftermath, right, of that winter encampment are not the same things they claim to have found on the winter encampment. It's not the same kind of so-called debris.
Hmm.
And I have to ask myself, why is that? You would think there would be sort of this continuity, right, in terms
Yeah.
of the kinds of things we would find.
Duplication. Hmm.
But it's not true, with some exceptions. And so I've begun to wonder if what they've got is evidence of a different encampment that predated DeSoto. It's possible there's some of the things there are DeSoto artifacts, but I think we need to ask now whether the bulk of the material on this Tallahassee site is not related to an explorer named Panfilo Narvaez, who uh, preceded DeSoto by
Hmm.
11 years in Florida.
Yeah. And one of the things, and I asked you about this earlier, and just to come back to it real quick, I want to be mindful of your time. I ask you, well, how do we know that some of these natives didn't trade with other natives farther down the river or up the river? And one of the stories that you tell in your book, and you can tell me the name of the place because I don't want to get it wrong. But when DeSoto's expedition got to what is now close to present day Columbia, South Carolina, to the great empire there, lo and behold, they found European artifacts there that they speculated came from one of these previous expeditions. Tell us the name of that place. I don't want to mess that up.
Well, the colony that was attempted in this stretch of coast, Atlantic coast, was called Gualdape.
Mm-hmm.
Gualdape, and it was established by a Spaniard named Ayllon, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon, in 1526.
Mm-hmm.
1526. So we'll say half a generation or so before DeSoto landed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Here on the coast of Georgia.
well, he landed first in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't exactly, he wasn't inspired by what he saw. And so he decided to beat a path southward to Georgia. And so the consensus now is he probably landed somewhere around Sapelo Sound
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in Georgia. But no one, that's one of the prizes out there yet to be found, is that the colony. It was short-lived. So it wouldn't have left a huge trace, but nonetheless, we should find it. But point here, of course, is that these folks did make landfall. They did interact with the natives, and some of their debris belongings could have filtered around, not only from the point of initial contact, but to other groups, say in the interior or elsewhere. And so that challenge was made to me when I started to describe the glass site artifacts. Well, they could have come from these places. Well, I cannot say definitively that some of them didn't, but until we find that colony and we know what they had,
Mm-hmm.
it amounts to speculation as to whether it be the same material or not. There are hints of the Ayllon colony on the Georgia coast, and one of those is in the form of glass beads. I have been doing a chemical analysis, this very sophisticated chemical analysis, working with people at the Field Museum in Chicago, of the composition of these glass beads. And I can tell you right now that the ones so far that we find on the Georgia coast that might have dated from the same time period are of a different chemistry of the ones we find at the glass site. So I don't think they're exactly the same. But it's that kind of intensive analysis that we have to undertake to address those kinds of questions and challenges. It is a fact, though, that these are highly portable objects. You could slide one into your back pocket today and wander off and drop it somewhere else, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Natives had for millennia been exchanging things among themselves. We know they didn't change that practice. And an attractive European artifact would have been something they would have changed hands. So it's really all about context and numbers. And I tell my students all the time, context is everything. And it's the evidence in aggregate. It's the kinds of Native American artifacts combined with the kinds of Spanish artifacts combined with what we know about the geography that gives us confidence in a claim of a DeSoto site. If I were to find a solitary DeSoto-looking artifact in a field, in anywhere Georgia, with nothing else, right, and sort of a vacuum of other evidence, I would never, ever make a claim that this is associated with that route. Never. For exactly the reasons you and others point out. But if I did find a quantity of those things, where we knew there was an Indian settlement of the right period, and where we knew that the geography, as we learn it from the Spanish in their accounts, squares, then I would be inclined to say this is at least a possible point on the route that we need to look at more and more closely. And that often will be the best we can do. But I'll just say, I suppose as one of the final comments is that that's what's happening. is that we're beginning to string together these places that have this kind of um, critical mass of information, of evidence on a line that equates with our hypotheses about the route that gives us the ability to make the claims that we do. So bottom line is there's often a one-to-one correlation between these places where we find that kind of critical mass and the line that people like Charles Hudson drew on a map of the southeastern United States.
Mm-hmm.
We'll tweak it here and there for sure, but Charles Hudson and the people who worked with him, Chester DePratter, Marvin Smith, did a splendid job, given what they had, of etching that line on the southeastern map. And now people like me are coming behind, just refining it. That's when I clock in the morning, that's what I start doing. And when I clock out at night, frankly, I don't stop doing it because it's a preoccupation.
Well, it's calling, and I know you're also training the next generation that's going to come along behind you and continue this work. And to end where we started, I mean, what this really says is that some of our states' legends and myths may not, in fact, be myth or legend at all, but it is, I think, true that whatever we learn going forward about the truth of Hernando De Soto and his expedition and its impact on the people who lived in Georgia and all the other states in the Southeast, that evidence will come up out of the ground. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Whatever we learn is going to be from the evidence that's out there somewhere for people like you and the generations that come after us to dig up out of the ground. We hope in a responsible way and in a way that'll help us learn about the people who were here before us, which is ultimately what this is all about.
That's exactly right.
Dennis Blanton, I can't thank you enough for coming on this podcast and not only teaching us about the past, but about what you're doing now. That's so exciting. I can't wait for this next book to come out and be a capstone, I think, for a remarkable career that you've had, teaching us about who walked this land before we did. For those, again, interested, this is his last book that came out in 2020, Conquistador's Wake, published by our friends at the University of Georgia Press. You can find that any place you can buy books, and continued good luck in all the work that you're doing. And thank you for coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure.